Hello, so today we're going to be painting our country road landscape. Before we get started, just a couple of things. Paint along at your own pace. Feel free to rewatch something if you need to or hit pause anytime. All of the tools that you're going to need today, I'm just going to quickly go over those. So first of all, you're going to need a canvas or paper, whatever it is that you like to paint on. I've got 6 colors of paint today. So we've got white, yellow, red, brown, black, and blue. We're going to use 3 different paint brushes. So I have my large brush, got a medium brush, and then I've got my small little brush for the details. And then of course we need to wash and dry those brushes in between color changes. So we've got a jar of water here and a rag to dry that off. And as you paint along today, feel free to get a little bit creative. If you want to go rogue and change anything up, go for it. Or if you're just more comfortable following along with my instructions, that's what I'm here for. So let's get started. All right, so we're going to get started on this background. So we need to start with our large paintbrush, and we're going to make teal. So we want to grab just a bit of yellow and then mix that into blue. So definitely a lot more blue than yellow. We don't want our paint to turn green. Grab a little more yellow. It's always better to just use a little bit of yellow at a time and just kind of watch for those subtle color changes. We're going for just a nice sort of greenish blue here. Nice bright teal. And sometimes when you're mixing these dark colors, it can be a little hard to actually get a feel for what your color looks like. So if you take one of your fingers, just dip it in, and then just give it a little bit of a spread out on the edge of your plate. You'll get a much better idea of what you're working with there. And I'm almost happy with that. I might just put a touch more yellow in there. Okay, that should do it. So I'm just making sure it's mixed really well, especially in those bristles. Okay, wipe off some of that extra paint. You always get lots of paint blobs on your brush when you're mixing, and we don't want that on our canvas. So we're going to come right up to the top left corner here and just paint in the corner with some diagonal brush strokes. Here's your sort of last chance to make sure you love that color. If you don't, you can make adjustments now. I'm happy with it, so I'm going to keep going. So I'm going to bring this color roughly about a quarter of the way down my canvas on the left-hand side here. And I'm going to use diagonal brush strokes, maybe with a little bit of a wave to them. So something kind of like that, up to this top right corner here. I'm just going to keep filling in that area. I'm not using too much paint because I don't want it to be too thick on there. I want it to dry relatively quick. Smooth it all out a little bit. And then to get a little bit of variation in color up here, I'd like to throw in a little bit of white just to get some lighter streaks. So I'm just going to take that dirty brush, grab a little white paint on there. And then come up here and just start brushing some of that in through my teal. Kind of lightening it at the bottom, and then throwing a few little streaks up through there. And you can blend these as much or as little as you want. So the more you take your brush over top, the more you're going to blend them and soften them. The less you do that, like if I just want to leave a really bold stroke in there, I could just put it on and leave it. So You can decide. Some people like things really blended. Other people like a little bit more of a bolder brush stroke. Or maybe just somewhere in between, which is where I am. So you're just sort of going to play with this section until you're relatively happy with it. I'm not going to touch it up too much anymore afterwards. So I think I'm going to stop there. And the next thing, I'm just going to wipe off this little blob. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to wrap this around the edges. So I'm just going to tilt my canvas forward a little bit so I can get that top. You always want to frame your canvas. Just saves you a little bit of money. You don't have to go out and buy a frame. And as soon as you're done, you can put it right up on the wall. Anywhere that color is wrapping around or touching the edge, you're going to wrap it around your edge. So down my sides. All right, that should do it. So I'm going to give my brush a really good rinse. I don't want any more of that color in it right now. Dry it off. And I'm going to switch to yellow next. So I want to just sort of get an idea where I'm going to put my sun. I think it's going to be right in here. So first thing I'm going to do before I even do my yellow is just take my finger, dip it into a bit of white paint. And right about where I want my sunrise, I'm just going to put a little white circle in there. And mine's about the size of a golf ball, maybe just slightly bigger. And then I want a really pale yellow, so I'm going to take a bit of white and a little tiny bit of yellow here and just mix those up. Really, really pastel. And then right around that little white golf ball, I'm just going to put a circle there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my finger again, grab a little bit of that light yellow color, and I'm just going to kind of swirl inward. Around my sun. I'm going to make it a little smaller, work on getting it as circular as I can. Basically, we're just sort of looking for that white to just fade out into the yellow. And now I want to add a little bit more yellow paint into that pale yellow, so it's a little bit brighter now. There's still a bit of white in there. More of a lemony yellow. And basically around that, I'm going to do sort of one more circle. And then again, I'm just going to use my finger to blend my brighter yellow into my lighter yellow. You can use a combination of yellow or white, whatever you feel you need, just to make those colors have a little bit more of a smoother transition. We don't want any sharp lines. Everything should just sort of kind of nicely transition. Right. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to draw in just a rough idea of where the top of my grass is going to go. So if I find the halfway point on my canvas, I do want it to be just maybe a little bit above that. So I'm going to kind of create a hill and a valley and maybe have it swoop up into another hill. So this is going to be sky and my land is going to be underneath. And I'm just going to pull a little bit more of that yellow, kind of at the bottom here of my sunrise. And then in between these two colors, I want to start to pull in some more orange so I can kind of just have another color added up in there. So for the orange, I'm just going to grab a bit of red, yellow, mix those together. Swiping off that excess paint. Now when we add this color in, it's going to blend in just fine into our yellow, but it's not going to blend very well with our teal color up here. The orange and the teal, if the paint is too wet and we mix them too much, we're going to get a little bit of brown happening. So that's not to say we can't kind of combine those colors at all. We just need to be careful that we don't overwork it and end up with this muddy color in between. So I'm just going to start kind of in the middle here. Just getting that orange laid in. And because it blends in so easily with the yellow, I'm going to do that first. So instead of bringing the orange down into my yellow, I'm going to do the opposite and bring yellow up into the orange. But I didn't clean my brush because I still want some of that orange paint on there. I'm just combining the two colors. Kind of going right over that seam. And now I want the orange to sort of melt into the yellow and the yellow to sort of melt up into the orange. And again, here's where you can sort of control how blended you want it to be. And then just play with it a little bit, the texture. So I might throw in a few bolder streaks here. I might grab lighter yellow and play with it. Basically, you're just going to play with these colors until you like the look of it. And then I'm just kind of grabbing some more of that orange. And now I'm going to start working it up into my teal a little bit. So I'm just going to get a little closer. Let some of it overlap a little. Sometimes you may need a little bit of white just to get a bit of coverage. I'm not sure how well you can see this, but I can sort of see the teal through, and I want to kind of cover that a bit more. So that little bit of white, it'll just make my paint a little bit more opaque. And I think I'm actually going to pull a little bit of teal down into my orange. So this is where you do need to be a little bit careful. You could wait until it's completely dry as well to do this. I'm going to take my chances though and just kind of pull it right over top. Again, as much or as little as you want with your blending, but be very careful if you're doing this that you don't overblend and don't get a lot of orange happening in there or a lot of brown happening in there. Okay, I think that's good. I'm gonna rinse out the brush and I'm gonna leave my sky alone. So we're gonna start working our way down the canvas next. We're gonna get in this little sort of grassy hill area. So to do that, I'm just gonna use the same teal that I did my sky, maybe just a tiny little bit more yellow added to it. And then I'm just following that line that I created earlier. Nice and smooth. Still using my large paintbrush. Make sure there's no white canvas peeking in between there, so you want to make sure your land comes up high enough. And then below that, so now we're roughly around halfway on our canvas. I'm going to make a straight line across. We'll say straight-ish. Straight lines, they can be a little tricky. But we will have a chance to kind of clean that up later on. And I want us to fill this in a little bit, so I'm just going to throw some teal kind of on the edge here. Maybe over on this side. And then I want to get some variations of color in there as well, just so it's a little bit more interesting. So I'm just going to give my brush a quick wipe here. Grab a little yellow. A touch of white again too, if you feel like you just want it a little bit brighter. If you ever go to the lines like I just did, you just go with the flow and make your ground a little higher. All right, and I also want to put like a little touch of that orange into this grass, just to kind of warm it up a little bit. So I'm going to rinse out that brush. Grab a bit of that orange. Just going to brush it in and then leave it. All right. And you can play with that a little bit more if you want, like maybe a touch of white on top if we want it to be a little bit brighter up there. Okay, and that is it. I'm just going to clean up my edge one more time here. And we'll give that brush another good rinse. continue working our way down. So down below this, we're gonna have this like golden wheat field. So it's gonna start out a little darker and then get a little bit lighter. And then we're gonna have a road down below that. So quickly, I just wanna sort of do a quick little sketch in of where that road is gonna go, just so that I have an idea how far down to go. So I'm gonna use yellow, just a little bit on my brush. And I'm just gonna kind of do this quick little zigzag. So I'm gonna start it up pretty high over here, angle it down slightly, have it come down a little, and then down on an angle right off the edge. So that's just separating wheat field and road. All right, so let's get going on the wheat field next. So we want it to be a bit darker at the top, as I was saying. So I'm gonna kind of create a cinnamon color. So I'm just gonna grab a little red and a little yellow. And I'm gonna mix that in with quite a lot of brown here. And again, sometimes you might not see a very drastic color change. So I'm just gonna dip a finger, kind of spread it out, throw a little more red in there. And I am putting a bit of yellow in as well there, just to counteract the pink. I don't want this to be too pink. All right, that should do it. Almost like a rusty color. So I'm just gonna take that, wipe some of that excess off my brush. And now right along the top, here's where you sort of have a second go at that straight line. Right across the top of the wheat field here and the bottom of the grass. We're gonna pull right across. Okay, and then I'm just gonna thicken that up a little bit. So I want it to be, I'm not adding any more paint, I'm just using what's on the brush. Pull some more of that darker color from the right side here. And you wanna work fairly quickly on this field because we don't want this paint to dry. It's gonna be a lot easier to blend if it's still a little bit wet. And if you also notice, I've got these like rough edges. There's no blunt, sharp lines. That's also gonna make it a lot easier to blend the next set of colors in. So I am just gonna rinse this out. Dry it off. Gonna grab some of this yellow in here. There's a little red in there, that's okay. And some white. And I'm gonna put a little bit of that brown into it just to dull it down a little bit so it's not too bright. And I'm painting that right underneath. And then I'm gonna overlap. So I'm pulling it into the previous color, going over and over and over and over where those two colors meet up. Again, just to get it blended. All right, and then coming down, I'm just gonna rinse out my brush again. Throwing a little more yellow over here, a little bit more red. Some I just want more of a, kind of a mustardy color. Throw white in there. A little bit brighter. And I'm going to use lots of white in the center here too, because I really want to brighten it up. And then this is just going to fill in the rest of the space. And I have too much paint on my brush here, so I'm just going to get rid of some of that. And spread out what I've got on the canvas. Don't worry about that zigzag line being perfect. You can mess that up a little. Could throw a little more of that orange again in the bottom maybe. This is basically going to be the background of our wheat field, so we're just sort of laying down some color so that we can add lots of texture on top of it. Okay, wrapping those edges. And if at any point you do forget to wrap an edge, you can always go back later on and kind of just touch those up. Perfect, so we have sort of that background down. We do need that to dry, so we're going to continue working our way down a little bit. And I'm going to rinse out that brush. And we're going to give the big brush a little rest here, and we're going to pick up our medium brush. So we have this little kind of strip of grass running underneath our fence in between the road and the wheat field. So I'm just going to grab a bit of that teal color I had. And I'm just going to start to kind of quickly just lay some of that in there. So I'm just sort of sketching it right along that zigzag mark. And I'm going to kind of just very messily blend that into some of that yellow. I just want nice soft edges. They don't have to be perfect. They just need to be a little softer, nothing sharp. Grabbing some of that teal down below. So I'm just thickening this up a little bit, but still keeping those edges really rough and messy. Okay. And then below that, we're going to start to switch into this road color. So we'll touch that grass up later, make it look much nicer, but for now that's just going to be, again, a background to the texture that's going to go on top. So our road color, I am going to go back to my large brush again. So make sure you clean your medium brush out. And we'll just kind of use the colors that we've got on our plate. So I'm going to use a bit of this brown and a bit of this yellow. And I just kind of grabbed a bit of each on my brush there. And I'm going to let those mix right on the canvas. So it'll be a little easier if you don't have too much paint on your brush. You can just sort of let that blend into that green a little bit. I'm going to grab a lot of that brown now and pull. So I want the right side to be a lot darker, so I'm just pulling in that brown. kind of on a slight diagonal, so down to the left a little. Again, no sharp edges. We want everything really just rough and messy. Rinse out your brush. And we're going to go into that yellow mixture that I've got up over here. It had some of the brown in it. Just that dull light yellow. And we're just going to use that to fill in the rest of the space, but also let it overlap into the brown. And this is just an old dirt road, so don't feel like it needs to be blended well. You can leave a lot of those streaks in. Always go back in with some of your dark color. Just take the next couple minutes and just play. Okay. And I think I'm going to leave mine at that. So I'm going to rinse out that brush. Actually, I'm just going to wrap these edges here. Try not to be forgetful. There we go. And by now, this area up here, it should be a lot drier. If it's not 100% dry, you're okay. Just make sure that you don't have any blobs of paint up there. So we're going to go in and we're going to start texturizing our wheat field a little bit. So again, we've pretty much got all the colors on our plate that we're going to be using. But I am going to rinse out that brush, give it a dry off. If you are using a smaller canvas, mine is 16 by 20. If yours is smaller, you might want to use your medium brush for this step. I'm going to go ahead, I might use a combination of both brushes, but for now I'm going to use I think I just painted myself. I did. For now I'm going to use my big brush. So I'm going to go ahead and just start out with this dark cinnamon color. And I'm just going to kind of keep this darker color in the darker areas. But I'm just kind of adding texture. So little brush strokes. Pulling kind of down and over. Just so it's not one solid color anymore, it's just kind of breaks it up, gives it a little texture. I'm gonna rinse that color out. And then I'm going to grab some of that orange that was up in my sky, but I am going to dull it a little bit with some brown, just so it's not quite so bright. And if you feel like it's a little too dark, add a little white. Always just play with your colors until you like them. They don't have to look like mine at all. If something different happens and you like it, go with it. Overlap a little bit of this up into that darker area as well, and then start pulling it down into the lighter spots. So there's not very much paint on my brush. If you can kind of see this up close, there is, like, my background is actually peeking through. So you really want to make sure you're scraping off that brush before you do this. You're giving it a really good swipe. And I'm not even thinking really about where they're going. I am literally just plopping color in, kind of clustering it together a little. Rinse it out for a color change again. I'm gonna grab some pale yellow. And again, I might put just a touch of brown in there, just to kind of dull it down, make it more of a beige. Right over top. And we're just gonna keep working this area. So different colors, you might create new colors. It could be any kind of shade of gold or brown, any orange, anything like that that will work in there. Just creating all different shades. I'm gonna go a little bit more brown here. And you want to be careful when your palette starts to look like mine, where all the colors are just kind of a mess. I've got this bit of blue in my yellow here. I'm being very careful to do my best to avoid that, because I don't necessarily want green right now added into this. You can always go back into your darker colors too if you want to layer a little bit of those in again. And how hard you press with your brush can make a difference too. If you're looking for like larger, chunkier sections, you'll press a little harder. If you want a little delicate, I'm kind of throwing in these little delicate, darker spots right now, and I'm just pressing light. I'm almost just using the tips of my bristles. And last but not least, you may even want to throw just a little bit of white. In there, just a few little highlights. Okay. So I think I'm going to stop. Happy with that. The next thing that we want to do is we want to start getting this fence sketched in. So right along this grass line, we're going to have these old logs with a little bit of a wire in between. So I'm going to switch over, just clean out my big brush here, And I'm going to switch over to my smallest paintbrush. I'm using a slight angled brush here, but any small brush will work. As long as you can get like a nice point on it, it'll do the trick. For these logs, I want to create a nice dark brown. So I'm going to take a bit of black here, mix that into some brown paint. I'm just going to stir those up till we get a nice, almost hot fudge color, nice dark chocolate. All right. Again, I'm going to swipe off that brush. You don't want too much paint on there, no blobs on your brush. And I'm going to start with my first log. So we're going to create a bit of perspective here. This is the closest, so it's going to be the largest. And then they'll get just slightly shorter as we work our way along. So just right in here, I'm going to create a vertical line. And then a second vertical line beside it. This is also not only the tallest, but probably the widest of our logs. Don't worry about your lines being perfectly straight. Logs aren't always perfectly straight. So if there's a little tiny bit of a wave or a wiggle there, just go with it. And on top, I'm going to create an oval. So I'm just going to use the tip of my brush here and just create a little oval. So I'm going to go through and sketch in all my logs and then come back and color them in. That's just going to give this background behind them a few more seconds to dry a little bit. So my next one, I'm going to space them out a little. And don't stress out about having the same amount of fence posts that I do. You might have more, you might have less, doesn't matter. So a little further away, tiny bit shorter. Definitely not any wider than the first one. Create that little oval. And then the next one. And then as we get into the corner here, I'm going to make sure that I've got a fence post right in the corner. And then just above that, so we're kind of following that little zigzag there. These guys are a little further away, so they're definitely smaller, they're thinner. All right, so just a quick little sketch in. And then we're going to start coloring these in. So basically we want to just sort of color with vertical brush strokes. If your background is wet behind, you may get some of those colors pulling in, and that can actually be a really good thing. It'll give your wood some natural texture rather than just being one solid color. We are going to purposely add more texture in though. So if it is dry and you're not getting that look, don't worry. So I'm not coloring in the oval parts just yet, just the vertical. You don't need to worry about the bottoms of your logs. We're going to be putting some grass in there. It's going to completely camouflage the bottoms. So if they're a mess, that's okay. Perfect, all right. So we're gonna color in those little ovals up top now. So basically what we wanna do is just kind of a variation of colors. We wanna have really light and really dark up in there. So I'm gonna start with the light. I'm just gonna wipe my brush off. And I'm gonna use kind of like a pale yellow. Just gonna make a little bit more with a bit of brown in it. So it's just gonna be this pale beigey. Something like this. Perfect, all right. And then again, I'm just kind of swiping off the excess paint. And I'm gonna come up and I'm just gonna kind of start to color those in a little bit. They don't need to be 100% filled in. But you do want most of it filled in. And then with that dark chocolate, just kind of filling in what's missing. Can kind of give them a little bit of a swirl effect too, just by sort of creating little half circles using that dark brown. The ones that get kind of further away, you don't need to worry too much about that oval at the top because you don't really see it that much. So even if it's just the suggestion that is there, that's good enough. They don't need to be detailed. Now we're going to texture the wood a little bit more. So I'm going to use some of that really, really pale color that I was just using at the top and just kind of pull some of that down. Streak some of that into the wood a little bit. I'm not going to blend it very much because I want it to have texture. I want to see those brush strokes. We're just breaking up the solid dark brown. We don't want it to be all one boring color. I do it just a little bit on these back ones. And then just one more way to add a bit of texture and a little bit more definition is to put some black. So I'm grabbing straight black, swiping that extra off, and doing the same thing. So I'm just going to pick and choose a couple areas that maybe I want to darken up in these logs, vertical lines. Not very much paint on the brush. Perfect. You can give that a rinse. And we're going to move on to that little wire kind of fence that's going in between all of these posts. So the first thing we want to do is the part that's wrapped around our logs. We just want to get those placed. So they should sort of follow kind of a diagonal line. So we need black paint, small brush, and you really want to swipe off the excess so you can get nice thin lines. The lighter that you press, so the less pressure that you use, the thinner your lines will be, the harder you press, and the more paint on your brush, the thicker those lines will be. So keep that in mind. You want to go for nice thin lines, so light pressure. So I'm going to start right about here, and I'm just going to make like a little bit of a smile. Right across each one, trying to sort of imagine them following somewhat of an imaginary straight line. And then I'm going to do the same thing below that. So I'm just going to come down a little bit. And we can do the same on these back ones here. Just two little black smile lines on each one. Perfect. Now we're going to connect all of those together. So with this line, I would highly encourage you to go have a cup of coffee. No, I'm kidding. But imagine you've had a lot of coffee and you do have a little bit of a shake in your hand. So what we're going to do is we're just going to very, very lightly press down and just start to join them up. But because I have this shake, my line's not perfect, and that's what we want. We're going to give this sort of the look of barbed wire. Still pressing really, really light. And I'm going to let that continue right off the edge of the canvas. And in between that, we're going to just kind of make some little X's, but really messy. They don't even need to look like X's. It's just kind of showing that there is maybe some barbed wire. You can just sort of dab away at it. Doesn't need to look like a perfect little X. The smaller your brushes, the easier this will be. Mine's a little bit bigger. But as long as we get texture going all the way along, it'll give the idea of barbed wire. With this like rough old wire fence here. And again, because these are so far away, you don't have to worry too much about adding in extra texture over there. All right, we're gonna just get down into the last few details. So at the bottom here, we wanna throw in a little bit of shadowing from these fence posts. So I'm just gonna rinse that little brush, pick up my medium brush, and I'm gonna use a little bit of that dark brown. But I really want there to be hardly any paint on that brush. So I am swiping as good as I can, getting as much paint off as possible. And then right underneath these, so kind of coming down to the right, just gonna kind of lightly brush. It's messy. You can see it's a little bit of work to get that paint to come off. I'm pressing pretty light. Kind of going over it and over it to get that color to come off. Just throw in a few light ones back there. So just suggesting there's a bit of a shadow. We're gonna finish off that grass. So I'm gonna go in with, first I'm gonna use my medium brush and I'm gonna make a little bit more green here. So I've got my teal, I'm just adding more yellow to it. Just to bring out more green and a little brown. So it's not so bright, it's a little bit more of a dirty green, more of an army color. We'll just scrape off the excess and just gonna kind of smudge some of that underneath here. Just some of that grass that's kind of starting to grow over on the road a little bit, blurring the two together. You really have to work for that paint to come off. If it's coming off really easy, you've probably got too much on your brush. Just smudge it around. Grab your smallest little brush and we're gonna create some little grass brush strokes here. So I'm just gonna I'm gonna mix a bit of teal with a bit of that dark green there just to kind of get a combination of the two. You could use any shade of green here though. Swiping off my excess. And now I'm gonna be pulling up. So I'm just lightly pressing my brush on, pulling up. All along, different lengths. Some a little longer, they can angle a little different. Sometimes they could maybe lean to the right, sometimes maybe they lean to the left. Right up over top of the bottoms of all of those little posts as well. That's what's going to sort of camouflage those bottoms. Keeping the perspective in mind too, your grass strokes would be a little longer and then they get a little shorter as you work your way across. Add just a few up in here. And then we're going to go in with just a little bit of a lime green right over top of these. So don't think about it. It's like we're adding in new pieces of grass. But we're going to do a layer right over top just to highlight a little bit. So a little blue and a little yellow. And a bunch of white. And the more yellow you can get into that color, the more lime tone it's going to have and a little bit brighter it will look. So I'll just scrape off that excess. And go right over top. If it's not really showing up, add a little more white. We do want this part to be pretty bold. There we go. And I'm not going to worry too much about highlighting down there. You can sort of smudge out the bottom a little bit if you feel like it's looking a little too harsh. So I'm just taking my brush and literally just kind of scribbling back and forth along the bottom of some of the areas here where I've done little bits of grass, just to soften it. All right, and then I'm gonna prop my canvas up a little tiny bit here. Down on the road, I'm just gonna throw in a couple more highlights. So I'm going in with a pale yellow. Just mix some up over here. Really, really pale yellow like butter. But I am scraping most of that off my brush. And then just kind of in between these shadows, I'm just gonna do a quick little scribble. And then the very last thing that we need to do to this painting is add a couple of birds up in the sky. So small brush. Grab just a little black paint. Make sure you've really swiped it off so you've got a nice point on your brush. And using the very, very pointiest little tip, we can just create some little V's. Really, really light pressure. And just small little birds off in the distance. And that's it. So double check that you've filled in all four edges there so that you have a complete frame on your canvas. Make sure you sign your paintings and you are done. So I hope that you enjoyed painting your country road today. And until next time, keep painting. And yeah, we'll see you guys next time.